joined by Heather Studio. You may know her from her YouTube channel where she creates super informative content surrounding Etsy and print on demand. I will be sure to have her channel linked below in case you aren't already subscribed. I know I've watched tons of her videos and she has taught me so much through them, and so I'm super excited to share with you this interview I did with her where we discuss starting an Etsy shop and the struggles new sellers are facing, as well as what obstacles she's faced with starting a brand new shop and what she has found success with. Heather shares some really great tips throughout this interview, and I can't wait for you to hear them, so let's dive into it. Hello, Heather. I am really excited to have you on my channel. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure that many of my viewers, they probably have been inspired by you, watch your content, but if there is anybody who does not know you, I would love for you to just introduce yourself briefly and share your history with print on demand.
Yeah. So my name is Heather, for anyone who's new to my content on YouTube. I'm on the YouTube channel Heather Studio, and I began my story with print on demand when the pandemic first came around. I was working full-time in healthcare. I was an MRI technologist, and at that time, they had to cut a lot of hours in different departments of the hospital to fund other parts of the hospital for like nursing and doctors. You know, it was completely reasonable. But at that time, I got cut hours. And luckily, I wasn't laid off at that time. We really just cut a lot of hours in our department. So instead of 40-hour work weeks, a lot of us were working 10 to 20-hour work weeks. And during the time of the pandemic, I realized I had to find a different job or like a second job. I was looking on LinkedIn, I was looking on Indeed for a second job. That's how I ended up stumbling across print on demand and Etsy on YouTube one day. It was on one of my on-call shifts at the hospital. I usually during the pandemic, we had a lot of on-call hours to kind of supplement for us not being at the hospital as often as far as imaging goes. At my hospital, I worked at a stroke center. So a lot of the times I was on call just for any strokes in my area that could happen. I would like rush into the hospital to image the stroke. And that's kind of why I was on call a lot. And my hours were like 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I could never sleep on those shifts because I always was like prepared. It was almost like sleeping in your scrubs because you're like feeling you're gonna get called out. Like sometimes I just kept my scrubs like right near my bed. And when I was on call, I was like, oh my God, like I can't sleep. So I would look on YouTube for like side hustles at night when I couldn't sleep. And I found the world of Etsy and print on demand. I ended up opening my shop in 2020. I was working with a print on demand provider that was ended up being very delayed in their printing, packing, and shipping times. The processing times turned into 2 to 4 weeks. And I opened this new shop. I got a few sales within the first month. And I was like, this is amazing. This is so cool that I'm getting sales. I was selling neck gaiters at the time. And I just did a simple like pattern designs on the neck gaiters. And those just sold like really quickly. But then since the pandemic and staffing issues with print on demand providers and also just stocking shortages, it turned to 2 to 4 weeks. And I knew reviews were most critical at that time in my first month on Etsy that I was like, okay, I have to close this because this is just a sign it's not going to work out. I also got my hours back in that time as well. So it was like, okay, I got my hours back. This Etsy shop is not working out like I thought it would. So maybe this is just a sign it's not for me. So I ended up closing the shop. I put it on vacation mode. So it's not like a full close. I just put it on vacation mode. I was like, okay, I'll go back to work. I'm just gonna, at this point in my life, I was like, okay, my goal is to just work my whole life as an MRI technologist, put in my years at this hospital, maybe one day go into management or maybe go back to school to teach. I really was passionate about teaching, and that's something that I really loved in healthcare was any new students. It was funny because I always got like we made kind of a joke that like we got sacrificed to teach, but I absolutely loved it. So everyone was like, okay, Heather can have all the new students, because students usually take longer with scanning and imaging patients. So anytime a new student would come in, people would be like, no, like this is like, because then also you have to stay over on your shift. That's basically like if you're training a student, it's like, okay, I'm going to stay over like an hour probably on my shift tonight. And I was like so for it because I just loved like teaching. I love training. And that's probably why I'm on YouTube now, because that's something I'm really passionate about. But with MRI, I just thought I'd work in MRI my whole life. And then I got really sad in like, I want to say the fall time of 2020. And I couldn't pinpoint why I was so sad until I realized that it was because I tried print on demand and Etsy. I failed at it. And I was still a part of Facebook groups that people were just doing so well on Etsy who had started the same time as me that didn't close their shops. And it was just like a slap in the face. I was like, oh my gosh, what if I kept my shop open? And so I reopened in 2021 because I was like, okay, like in the fall time, that's when I got an overage of hours. So instead of having cut hours, now I was making up all the hours that I lost earlier in the year, which was really nice. Like I was so grateful for that. It was like, wow, I'm making the most I've ever made in healthcare, which was still not as much as my print on demand and Etsy shop ended up doing. But I was making more than ever in healthcare, and my hours were like doubled. I was working double on call hours. I had like coworkers who were quitting left and right. So I was taking extra hours on. And during that time, I was like, this is just not it. This cannot be life. So I restarted my shop in 2021. I went from zero sales to 250K in sales within that year. That's revenue with profit. I was making over 100K of gross profit before taxes. When taxes came out, it was more like 70K in like actual take home profit in my bank account. And that was well over anything I've ever made in healthcare. It dawned on me that year, like, oh my gosh, I can quit my full-time job. I ended up going down to part-time in by 2022. I fully quit my job of May 2022. I was actually part-time, but I was only working like 1 day a week part-time for a little bit. So it was just really cool that I worked somewhere that allowed me to do that. I was really grateful that I could work part-time and kind of test out the entrepreneurship. And then I came on YouTube. I started making tutorials, and now I have a new shop that I'm testing out. But all in all, like that's kind of my story of how I've started and grown with Etsy and print on demand. At this date, like I've done about 450K plus in revenue, which is kind of cool to have under my belt now. As
Yeah,
far as
really cool.
yeah, yeah, it kind of led me to quit my job, so
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy about it.
Yeah, just a casual comment there, but
Yeah.
that's really cool. It's really inspiring, and I know that I always personally love hearing other individuals' stories who have had a lot of success. That's something that motivated me and kept me going as I was starting my shop. And you shared that you're starting your new shop, or you started your new shop. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit, because I know many of my viewers, they are just starting. I do coaching, and every single person that I've coached for the most part is under 6 months in their Etsy and print on demand journey. And so I think that you have a lot of value by starting a new shop in 2023 that I'd like to explore and dive into a little bit. So just to kind of summarize, what has been your experience so far with starting a new shop in 2023?
So, as far as 2023 goes, with my experience, I guess. So, I feel like, first of all, I do want to address I do have an unfair advantage because I know the niches that really sell. I know the design styles. I like all I do for work now. I mean, I'm on YouTube and I do research tutorials all day, every day. So, I do have that unfair advantage. So, when I tell people, like, oh, in my first month, I made like 20 plus sales, a lot of people are like, okay, that's like really amazing. But also to know, I do have this experience that a lot of people don't necessarily have, or not, they don't have the time to allocate to market research as often as I do. But I guess my experience with this new shop has just been trying out methods and kind of testing theories to kind of disprove theories in a way, and also just teach what I'm preaching on my YouTube channel, because I think a lot of people, or I guess I feel like I said that wrong. Preach what I'm teaching, or I don't. Is that how you say it? Like
Practice what you preach.
Practice what you preach. Okay, I am so sorry.
So
Um,
we all knew what you meant. We knew what you meant.
yeah, yeah. So basically, like on the new channel, I do want to like go about the channel practicing what I preach as far as the new shop goes. And one of those things is just scaling designs out to multiple product types. That's one thing that I'm really practicing in the new shop that has been working. And I've seen so many sales through products that I've scaled to multiple products and product types. And even when I'm talking about different product types, it doesn't have to be a huge jump. It can just be instead of a black accent mug, you do a white mug. And that's like the only difference I'm talking about as far as product types that I've noticed just really can scale a business. Because if you have one bestseller design, why not take it to a slight variation? Like if I took it to an enamel mug, or instead of the black accent mug, if the main variation was a red accent mug, even like something like that, that seems so simple, can really like change the results of your sales on a daily basis. Recently, I think your channel will be the first place that I've updated about the new shop, but it's hit already over 250 orders, over $6,500 in revenue. I am barely making a profit though, because I've invested so much in this new business. So it's not at that profit standpoint yet where it's like, okay, big revenue numbers, but what about the profit? I'm still at pretty much break even, but at least I'm like at break even now because I was down for the count for a little bit. But and some of the best sellers that or not best sellers, it's not a bestseller yet, but it's one of my top performing products that has been on it, has been a black accent mug. And initially I started this mug design on just a white mug. And I found the black accent mug ended up selling way more than the white mug in the white version.
Wow.
But they both sell, which is kind of funny. But the black accent mug is selling on a regular basis. I sell it almost once a day now, which is really
Wow.
cool. So yeah. So tiny
Wow.
little, changes I've noticed, like tiny little scaling methods can really go a long way as far as diversifying your product types in tiny ways. And that's, I guess, one of my experiences I'm noticing with the new shop. So that's kind of my new methods. But
Yeah.
I'm also using Etsy ads as well. And I know Taylor, she was on my channel. So if you do want to check that out, I do have it on the channel. But Taylor, you shared that even for you, doing the Etsy ads, just a few dollars a day, that's kind of what my new method is to not use social media this time around and just do the Etsy ads. And that's what I really attribute to getting such high sale volumes in the first month. That's one of the reasons also I'm not seeing a profit yet, is because I have been using high amounts of ad spend a day just to kind of jumpstart the shop before quarter 4. Now we're in quarter 4. So I'm curious to see how this goes after jumpstarting, but that's basically my takeaways so far.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting you sharing that about the Etsy ads. And, even though you aren't necessarily profiting, and especially in the beginning where you might have been at a loss, that still provided you that insight, that data, so that you were maybe able to tell, hey, this mug is doing really well. Let me make that small tweak. And I love that you share about making a minor tweak in product type, going from one type of mug to a different type of mug, maybe even just a cosmetic difference between one versus the other. Because I think that when a lot of people talk about branching into different product types and putting those same designs on different product types, I personally think extreme, and I'm sure many others maybe relate to that as well. If I hear different product type, I'm like, t-shirt, phone case.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the most extreme jump sometimes. And it's good to think smaller and not overthink it. This is working on a mug. Let me try it on this different type of mug. And clearly that worked really well. You mentioned something else about how you are just trying to test some different things and even debunk things in this new Etsy shop. Is there anything else specific that you have been trying to debunk or test currently?
Many things. I think I think like YouTube comments have inspired me to do this new shop out of everything. I think the main comment that I see is, oh, people who are on YouTube they're on YouTube for a reason. I see that often on Reddit. It's just like, oh, these people, they're on YouTube because they're trying to make or like profit off of other people who are like teaching this, and they don't know actually what they're doing. And that's one thing I'm kind of dispelling, or I don't, is that right? Dispelling. I don't know. I feel like I
It
made up that
sounds
word.
right to me. Well,
Yeah.
if it's not, then somebody will tell us, but
Yes.
I think it sounds right.
Yeah. But that's one thing that I'm kind of disproving in this is, I get the comment a lot, just like, oh, she started during a pandemic. This isn't really how it is in 2023. So I'm kind of disproving these things through just showing like, hey, like these things are still working in 2023. This is my case study. Here is the proof, basically. And the other thing is just that print on demand is saturated. I've seen that so often as, oh, that's a common YouTube comment. And I'm sure you get it too now, since you've been growing on YouTube, is when I talk about mugs or t-shirts, it's like, oh, you're just showing these product types and categories, but you're not actively selling in them. So how can you tell us to go into this, but you're not showing us? So now I'm showing it. I'm showing, hey, I'm selling mugs. And everyone said those were saturated. Why am I getting sales? Now I'm showing t-shirts. Everyone says, or I'm selling t-shirts in my Etsy shop and I'm showing it on my YouTube channel. And people are like, oh, like you're showing these, but there's no way you can enter the market in 2023. Yet, why am I selling that in 2023? So those are things that I'm being a little bit sassy and disproving as I go forward, but I think it needs to be done and it needs to be said, because a lot of people want to make all of these excuses on why the business model didn't work for them. But if you know the right strategies and the things like we're teaching on YouTube, we're not trying to lead people astray here. We're just trying to teach what we know, and hopefully it helps someone else. And if it doesn't, at least they tried it and maybe they found something else through it. I've heard about people who have tried print on demand. They've learned the concepts I've taught on my channel and they applied it to a digital shop, and they ended up being highly successful for a digital business, and that's what I think about, is maybe this path doesn't lead you to the success that we saw, but this path leads you to something else that could be something that could make you quit your 9 to 5 one day, like I have done, so.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that kind of ties into the mindset that you have to have with print on demand and the persistence that you have to have as well. And you self explained it as being sassy, but I felt like that was a mic drop moment, and I think that that's something that I do try to be really transparent with on my channel, that this is work. It does take time. You just have to be consistent. You have to keep showing up. And I think it is really easy often. We all do it. I do it all the time and I have to catch myself, but we blame other things as opposed to blaming how we're showing up and whether or not we are actually doing the work and being consistent and doing the research. It's really easy to blame the things around us. So I know mindset's something that I am very passionate about and try to instill in my channel and want to share that positivity. But could you touch on mindset and if you feel it is a factor in a successful print on demand business?
Yes, I think it's the most critical step in the process of print on demand and Etsy and just entrepreneurship in general. If you are going to be an entrepreneur, you have to have your mindset right. There is just no way you can or be self-sufficient in this business model without having a very strong mindset, as far as, knowing a few things that I've kind of touched base on a few times in my channel. And I try to repeat it as often as I can, but entrepreneurship at the end of the day is a trial and error business. None of us know we're going to be successful. Even, we could have all the tools in our toolbox to be successful. And that's why you see a lot of really rich people starting businesses and not being successful, because they have all the tools in their toolbox, but they did not make it work. And there's a reason for that. And sometimes it comes down to their mindset. Just because you're, really wealthy and well off and you have all this ad spend does not mean you're going to have a profitable business. And it really comes down to mindset, like you said, persistence, consistency. It's really continually showing up for your business. Like you said, Taylor, you said that the perfect way is you have to show up on a daily way to maybe make a listing, maybe watch a YouTube video. That's at least what I was doing when I was working full time. And I know you are too, Taylor, now where you're working full time and you're doing this and you're even doing YouTube. You're learning a different craft now. And that is amazing in itself that you're doing that, by the way. I have just massive props for you because that's why I quit my 9 to 5, because I realized YouTube on top of everything, like when you're editing videos, when you're doing Etsy and print on demand, and you're trying to practice what you preach, basically, it's a lot and it's a lot of things you're handling. But like YouTube, like Etsy, the common thread that I found in every business that's been successful is consistency, showing up every day, having that trial and error mindset, knowing that this may not work, but you shouldn't have that hard expectation that, hey, like I want to make 100K in like a month, or something extreme that you may not realize you have. And that goes back to mindset. Is you may think, oh, you may not realize you're thinking that way, but it's good to kind of stop yourself and like write it down. Like, what's a realistic goal? And I'm not saying like super realistic that like you can't even dream, it's like, oh man, I'm going to make 1 cent this month. Like, yeah, like, I mean, if that helps you, to say, hey, I'm going to make 1 cent of profit this month, that's like my realistic goal. Like, that's great. But like having something that's inspirational for you, like a mid-tier goal, maybe like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to make $100 maybe my third month, because that's kind of more realistic with this business model than maybe around 6-month time frame, a few $1,000s in total, kind of slowly scaling it and not comparing your journey to other people's journeys. I think that's really important to note, because a lot of people go into it, they hear a story like mine and they're like, oh man, I'm going to make $450 in 2 years, in revenue. But that's just an extreme scenario. And the average is not as extreme as that. I like sharing my story to inspire, and I don't mean to discourage people by saying that, but like that is the reality. Is a lot of shops are going to do maybe like a side income, which is still really nice, but it might not be enough to quit your full-time job. And that's kind of decided on, again, how often you show up in your mindset to begin with. So
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it and how much you're able to put in. But I think that it's also not to get discouraged, right? If
yeah.
you don't have the time to put in because you don't know what that one listing that you may have time for could possibly be or do for your print on demand business. And so I want to close out, and I think this kind of goes right in theme with where I would go with this. But I would love to hear from you for anybody who is just starting out, wanting to get started, or maybe they're kind of in the thick of starting their shop and maybe haven't seen success with it yet. What would be your biggest piece of advice for those individuals?
I would say getting out a journal or a paper when you're deciding to start, and not just setting a goal, but actually an action plan. And I think that is really most important, is to kind of look internally, ask yourself what's stopping you. You could write it down on that piece of paper too. Be like, what's stopping me? Like, is it just failure? Like the concept of failure, is that what may be stopping you and hindering you from even starting? I would kind of reflect on that and be like, okay, if it's failure, like, why am I scared to fail? When it's like, if you're unhappy with your life right now, what is stopping you from achieving happiness? Is it financial goals? And if that's the case and failure is what's stopping you, then you may have to look at failure and kind of change the concept and say, failing is okay. Failing is what I'm going to do. And instead of running away from that and not starting this business, maybe run towards that and try to fail, because you may be surprised, like you were saying, Taylor, about that listing. What if you created a listing and in a year that ended up being your bestseller? Not to say that's going to happen with your first listing ever. It takes time, it takes practice and experience, but that could happen. That is what happened to me. And I'm sitting here now. So it's just writing down those goals, putting it on paper, making that action plan. Maybe that's one listing a day. And not to say the volume of your listings is going to attribute to your success. It's quality, intentional listings over time. But to just start, it's going to be looking and self-reflecting and figuring out what's stopping you, and then putting maybe that down into writing, and then writing down your goals, action plan. And that's what I did when I began. I asked myself, I was like, what's stopping me? And I was scared of that failure. Like, and I was that person who I did write down my goals. I wrote down an action plan the year that I made 250K in revenue that led me to quit my 9 to 5. So coming from someone who experienced that, that is the best advice I could probably give.
That was excellent advice. I didn't expect you to get so deep, and I'm glad that you did. I feel inspired. I need to go buy another journal right now, which I always will take an excuse to buy a new journal. I love a journal.
Same.
But I think that is so important, just putting those thoughts to paper so that they can be released in a sense, right? Because we all have them, no matter what our goals are. Big, small, they're all big to us and important to us. So I think that was really great advice. And I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that a lot of people will find value in that. I found value in it. So yeah, that was fantastic. Well, if anybody isn't already subscribed to Heather, which I'm sure many of you are, of course, though, her link will be in the description for you to go to her channel. She has so much content. And as I was learning Etsy and print on demand, Heather is somebody who I watched probably every single video of, and maybe even multiple times. I learned so much through her content. And so I encourage you guys to do the same, because there's a lot of golden nuggets sprinkled throughout her content as well. But Heather, thank you so much for coming on my channel. This was such a pleasure. It's great chatting with you. And I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Taylor.